at that moment, a clarity came through her that said the pain will persist until it has served its purpose. Something about how does pain ultimately serve its purpose? How does it fuel our compassion? How does it deepen our empathy so that we can show up as more humble and more kindness and more compassion for each other?
Hello, my soul brother and sister. If you are looking to heal trauma, really heal trauma, and learn some really important new practices and important ways to shift your body, the somatics around it, and find hope in a world right now that can feel very dark at times, please stay tuned and keep watching and listening to this episode with Dr. Arielle Schwartz. You are going to want to hear every word. It was absolutely beautiful. I'm so glad you're here. As always, a gift to be with you on your journey of being your You-est You. All right, I am so excited. First of all, welcoming our beautiful listeners. You, beloved listener, thank you for being here. You're in for a treat. Dr. Arielle Schwartz is here with us and we're going to be diving. I really want you to know we are diving into the deep end of the spiritual pool. And you have been doing, I know, as a psychotherapist, best-selling author, yoga, post-traumatic growth, embodiment, somatic healing. There's a lot. I was looking at your work and thinking, oh my goodness, such a wise woman. I feel like you feel like you're 800 years old in wisdom to me, and not that at all, obviously in age. So I'm excited to really get into the depths of recovery and healing trauma. And also, we set an intention beforehand and really not just giving a sense of hope, but also some real practices that our listeners, our beloved community can use. So long-winded way to say I'm so happy you're here, Arielle. This is such a gift to have you.
Thank you. I am so grateful to be here. I feel your intentionality in how you create this, and you use the word blessing, and I feel that it's a real blessing to be here with you. We set intentions around alleviating collective suffering and giving that sense of hope, and I can already feel the tendrils of that at work.
Beautiful. It's Let's go there. There's a lot. I feel like I already am getting so many questions for you. I think what would be really helpful is to go back a little bit for those who don't know you or your story. What got you into this line of work? Was this something you always knew you wanted to do? Was there something you experienced that was either traumatic or challenging? Maybe to just share a little bit more about your background,
Sure.
Arielle, to start.
Yeah. Always knew, certainly not when I was a child. And I think that's where the story begins, in the sense that I grew up with a lot of early adversity, and so much so that it left me feeling very disconnected from myself, dissociated from myself, disoriented in the world, and fractured and fragmented from what my childhood brought to me. And in some ways, other than the fact that my parents had a kind of messy divorce when I was 2 or 3, maybe from the outside looking in, it probably didn't look that bad, if you know what I mean. But there was, for me, I think the combination of being a very sensitive soul, if you want to put it that way, in combination with growing up across 2 households that were markedly different from each other, and one of those households where I just didn't feel emotionally safe to be myself. That experience of, for 3 days of my week, every week of my entire childhood, going into a landscape where I didn't feel comfortable, it built up and it accumulated in me mentally, emotionally, physically, like every way that trauma can build up inside of one person. It showed up for me. And so I had kind of physical health problems. I had a lot of anxiety by the time I was my late teenager, young adult. I experienced a lot of depression. I faced suicidal ideation. Like, I just struggled a lot. And I had these like very deep spiritual and kind of profound experiences of being held, even in the midst of all of that. Part of that was the fact that I also had a household where I felt very safe. I felt very held by my mom and my stepdad. And so I always had that to go back to. And even in my darkest moments, my most contracted, hopeless moments, there would be these kind of magical strangers that would show up. There would be these profound, life-changing moments that kind of like set me back on the course.
Wow, there's a lot in what you just said. Actually, something that just stands out to me to go back to what you were in the beginning is, on the outside, people may not have been able to tell. And this is something that can be, I think very challenging when it's happening on in the inner world, right? It's not a necessarily obvious stressor, abuse, unsafe experience. I actually relate very much to this and the disassociating. I know our listeners, are relating because this is, I always say like attracts like, right? So that disassociating, that leaving yourself, the sensitivity, I first of all really resonate. And I can imagine also the dichotomy of in one household feeling seen and held and safe, and then part of your life, like what did that do to your nervous system? Like what did I would even imagine digestion, like all of it, because it's all connected. How did you reckon that? How did you make sense of that? Was that you started to get into that work in college or after, or how did you, and yeah, tell us more, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really naming like all of those impacts and the nervous system sitting as the central connector between all of the systems, how we're processing emotionally, mentally, physically, right? And my digestion was off. I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome when I was 23, right? Very young. I had tremendous anxiety, a lot of respiratory distress as well. And because I had so much respiratory distress growing up, I was chronically on antibiotics at least twice a year. So that threw off my gut, right? So it just became this kind of vicious cycle. And the things that set me on this path that helped me compassionately understand my symptoms and grow and change and develop more balance and ultimately heal, things like yoga. That came in when I was a young child, and then I kind of wandered away from it. But my parents, my mom and stepdad, also had yoga as part of our household, so that came in very early. And then I, stepped away from it when I was 20 years old. I went back to the yoga mat and very quickly resonated back with, I can do this practice and I feel okay. I feel good. I feel clear-headed. I feel better. I'm sleeping at night. Like all of these markers of like, I want more of that. And so by the time I was 21, I had a daily yoga practice. Like it was a lifeline for me. I was also introduced to somatics very early that same year, 2021. I went to the somatics workshop. It changed my life. I was like, oh my gosh, like it opened up this felt sense of connection. Even though it was painful, it was raw, it was emotionally rocky. It felt better than feeling like I was looking at the world from behind myself or outside of myself. And, so I kind of had this journey for a while because I also had this profound spiritual moment, and I feel like it's an important part of the story. So I had in college done a abroad phase in France. I went abroad. I had some rocky moments there. I had some beautiful moments there, but I had this spiritual experience there where I was taking a nap one day and I went into this state in my nap, and then my consciousness woke up, but my body was still asleep, right? Sometimes we call that sleep paralysis, or we have different names for it. But basically, I had this experience and I could hear everything that was happening. And meanwhile, outside of the place that I was staying, they were doing construction on the street outside. And there's this jackhammer that's kind of, vibrating into the concrete outside of the apartment. And when my consciousness woke up, I suddenly started to feel this energy moving up and down through my body. And it terrified me because I had this association that somehow this jackhammer had hit an electrical wire that somehow got to my metal bed frame and I was being electrocuted. I seriously laid there, unable to move, thinking I was going to die as these waves of very erratic electricity are moving through my body. At least that was the felt sense in the inside. And I'm, attempting to move. And what happens is that I can start to feel energetically like I'm moving my arms, I'm moving my legs, I'm moving. But you know what I'm talking about. You're nodding, right? But my body wasn't literally moving. And so when the experience stopped, and I realized that the entire thing, first of all, I survived. I didn't die. I wasn't electrocuted. What was that? And then it happened again 2 weeks later. And at that point, I was like, okay, like something is happening here that's calling for my attention, that's needing me to really listen to this. And I came back to the States, I went back to college, and I literally didn't talk to anybody about this for 6 months. It scared me so much. I finally had the courage. I talked to a friend of mine. I was like, this thing happened. And she's like, well, I don't know anything about that, but I have the sense that you should go talk to this professor at our college. I went to Oberlin College in Ohio. Go talk to him. He might know something about it. So I end up having this kind of in-depth conversation with him about this experience. And he goes, well, I've never experienced that, but I've read about things like this. And he kind of set me on this path of handing me these books about things like Kundalini and things like outer body experiences and these books that started to like help me relate to my own experience, not as something scary, but as this possibility of awakening. And so it sent me on this journey that for a while was exploring kind of like outer body experiences. Like what happens? What is this soul as separate from this physical experience? And I did that for about 2 years. Like I went on this deep dive of how do I master getting out of my body? And then I hit another kind of wall of actually leaving my body puts me at great risk. I actually don't want to get out of here. I want to learn how to be in here. And that took me to my master's degree in somatic psychology. And this was in 1996. I was 23 at the time. And I just did this deep dive of what a friend of mine calls somatics. Like, I'm not going to be an astronaut. I'm going to go in and get to know this landscape.
Wow. That is really powerful. I want to ask, I can hear the gift, right, in this experience and the following the spiritual breadcrumbs, getting the books and opening. What made you feel it was dangerous to leave your body? I think it's important to talk about that for a moment because there's a lot out there about how do we levitate and astral travel and there's some that might do that and that's fine, and there's probably safe ways to do it. And let's go into what felt not safe. What was the unsafe piece for you? And then we'll go into the inner, because I'm excited. That is like, we have not covered that as much here. And I want to talk all about that.
Yeah. So I had moved out west at this point, and I was doing these deep dives, and I was reading a lot of kind of channeled material, and I was just really curious about other people that had had these kinds of spiritual experiences. And the more that I opened myself up to it, and I really had learned to take myself into those states and to experiment with coming and going. But what I started to feel was that it actually left me really vulnerable to, I don't know if you want to call it beings, entities, disembodied souls. Like I started to feel that they were kind of going, oh, like here's an empty shell. I can go and inhabit that, like a crab finding an empty shell on, and discarding one and entering another. And I mean, it sounds really strange, but I think it's worth talking about.
Yes.
Right? Of like the ways in which not inhabiting my own vehicle left it kind of fair game for others.
It's interesting. I interviewed recently, I think it was Julie Kramer, who does a lot
Oh, I know
with,
Julie
yeah,
well.
Julie, we love Julie, and talking about looking at discarnate soul, looking at souls in a different way and helping them
Mm-hmm.
return back. It was beautiful. It was beautiful the work she does. And it was
Mm-hmm.
making me think as you were talking, there's that frame, obviously. And for the souls that are not fully back or confused or wherever they still are in that as in your life as you in this body, that would be, I was feeling my own self, it could be scary, frightening, and frankly off off-putting. I'm trying to think of the right word, but you
Yeah.
know, it's one thing to help, because I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. We talked about helping them, her role and how we can hope and bless and usher them back.
Mm-hmm.
But really what you're saying is, and the crab is a good example, but you're making yourself vulnerable to have these. I think it's important to talk about this here because I know there's someone listening who might be interested in the leaving their body, while here on earth, and to be really mindful. It's interesting, Arielle, for me, I just have to say, in the times I had wanted to, try something like that, I think I almost feel like within myself, there's this contract that's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
you are going to stay here and go in. I feel like there's a bouncer working with me who's like, nobody comes in, nobody. So that was been a frustrating thing of just, okay, that's what it is. However, I love this other side of it is we need to be mindful because it can make you very vulnerable and susceptible.
And I think part of what led me to be particularly vulnerable and was the dissociation, was the trauma, right? And so like if we look at that intersection, I had already found ways to not inhabit or to not feel or to not be with what my body knew. And as a child, I also had enough experiences where I felt powerless and voiceless and basically had to do what I had to do in order to belong, in order to be part of a family. And so, these experiences were being mirrored at that spiritual realm in which basically feeling like these things were happening to me, rather, I was in charge rather than feeling in charge of my own spiritual journey.
It's really powerful. I think in terms of disembodying ourselves, leaving when there's trauma, and it's something I've shared here. I'm curious your thoughts. For me, it showed up addiction, especially for me, it was actually around food. I always laugh because, you don't get pulled over eating M&Ms, but I should have because I was just as out of my tree for a long time. It didn't seem that way, right? And so for many of us, I think not staying long enough with the emotions with our body, addiction is a big component, an issue with, how do we, I know for me, learning to sit with emotions, feelings, things that were uncomfortable, that felt icky, that out of control, it's taken years. I'm still not fully there. And I'm wondering, was that something that ever showed up in your life, or what else did you, I'm sure studying somatics, I'm curious about the role of addiction and how else we kind of, flee ourselves to not have to
Mhm.
deal.
Yeah. I will definitely say that sugar was part of that journey for me too. And sugar, carbs, like anything that was like a fast, quick hit for my body and my, almost kind of like that adrenaline or kind of being stuck in those dopamine cycles. But finding those ways to not have to feel. And then that cycle is a really vicious one too, especially with the gut dysbiosis that I had at that, very young, is that it would then trigger experiences of fatigue and brain fog. And then I would want to cope with that with more caffeine and sugar. And that became its own vicious cycle that thankfully, I mean, the one thing I have to say I'm really grateful for in this whole journey and trajectory is, I'm describing to you experiences that happened in my very early 20s, 20, 21, 22. And by the time I was 23, I got into somatic therapy. I started to heal my trauma. I started to address the dissociation. I was in school to study somatics. I did my yoga teacher training when I was 22. And so like I launched into this world of healing very young. And I think it saved my life in so many ways. When I was probably 26, I cut out sugar completely. I went for an entire maybe it was a little later, maybe it was 28, but I went for like 2 years without eating sugar and it was the body ecology diet. It was this incredible shift for my own physiology that I got out of brain fog. I got out of those cycles. And again, like this whole mind body shift that was happening at that time. And, I still feel that dramatically shifted something in my physiology.
Let's talk about somatic healing, and it's a large landscape. I think I'll let you pull the thread where you want to start. And I'm grateful. This is where we talked earlier, and I was saying this podcast is such a blessing for me. I always am blessed by these conversations, and I'm imagining I am not the only one listening and hear part of this conversation where I know for me, sitting with being embodied, I mean, honestly, it was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. It's still not always the most fun thing. I'm not always like, yay, let me sit with, my grief or envy or whatever it is. Let's talk about it, and wherever you want to start. It's great.
Yeah. It's interesting right now where I feel drawn to start is in my experiences with body mind centering. This is the work of a woman named Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And then a student of hers, her name is Susan Aposhian, was one of the core teachers at the Naropa Institute, where I came out. It's now Naropa University. So I came out here in 96 and I did a 3-year master's. I worked very, very in depth with Susan, and so she integrates this format of body mind centering, which actually goes back to our earliest learnings in our body, our earliest kind of imprints of experience, and how that shaped our bodies, our felt sense of self, and our ability to move through the world. So when I say earliest, I am talking like from conception, from implantation, in utero experiences, and the first year of life, and how we basically embody in the first place. And so a lot of this work is looking at when we have disruptions or traumas, again, sometimes traumas that we don't even fully know about, because if we're going all the way back to conception and implantation and in utero experiences, those also tap us into generational wounds, because that's where those also start to get picked up. And so working very, very specifically in this embodied format where we were invited to lay on the ground, to rock, to go into rocking movements, to go into rhythmic movements, to relearn how to move the spine in ways that actually are creating more spinal radiation and coming out of freeze states of where we go into rigidity, to relearn how to crawl and reclaim the sense of cross-lateral integration between left and right sides of the body, and therefore left and right sides of the brain. And so spending literally 3 years relearning from the bottom up, from the ground up, right, how to inhabit a body. And looping into the fact that there was generational trauma in my mother's lineage, for sure, on both sides. There was in utero trauma, was a stressful pregnancy. She was divorced by the time, I was 4, but there was a lot of early strife that even was happening in their relationship when she was pregnant with me. There was a lot of unrest and scary experiences in those first few years of life. There was also a lot of blessing and a lot of beauty. So, there's always a complex mix in there. But kind of looping around those places known by my nervous system, even if I didn't have a narrative or a story. And being able to gently, slowly, like I said, we're talking years, right? 3 years of that program, but literally years since, of learning how to gently unwind the impact of those complex layers of trauma.
I really think it's just so important what you're saying. I don't know that I've read and studied this a little bit. I really love this, like going all the way back. Like we're talking, I mean, I don't know if many of us have thought about, conception and
Yeah.
in utero, maybe a little, but really relearning the foundational patterns. So for someone listening who has not done this work before, where would you say to start? And
Mm.
maybe, maybe it's rocking on your back side to
Yeah.
side or crawling, or what would be some good practices for someone listening who's like, I want to repattern myself. I want to be embodied. I know
Yeah.
that's a large question, but where would
It
we
is.
start?
It is. I think it's kind of in some ways been the focus of my career is to kind of like basically offer these opportunities to experience in gentle, loving ways. How do we come back? How do we hold ourselves with compassion around those tender places? Now, sometimes we know the story, right? Or we've been told the stories about the generations that preceded us, or what was going on during pregnancy, or what was going on in that first year of life. Sometimes we don't have any idea, but we just have to come in and trust the felt sense. I would say that the where we start, especially for this early material, is to work with someone that's familiar with that landscape, because it is hard to go there on our own. When we're touching into in utero or prenatal, perinatal type wounds, it's hard to see them in ourselves. Or maybe we sense them, but we don't know what to do with them yet. And so I think it's valuable when we have that opportunity of a gift of someone who's basically bearing witness and helping hold us through that journey. And, when I teach courses, even my courses with the Shift Network, as we spoke about before, very often what I'm doing there is I'm basically guiding groups of students through these types of experiences where they can go into the rocking and the reset and the cross-lateral integration and the breath integration and spinal movements. I'm guiding that. And then we're checking in as a group, and how is that integrating and how's that landing and what are you noticing now? And most often there's layers of emotional healing, and there's the group can hold that. Like we have this amazing team of assistants, and so we're really tracking that together. So even if we can't find a one-on-one therapeutic space, much of my healing happened in those class environments where someone was guiding us, and then we got to basically be held in that collective.
I am so curious the role of intuition. We've talked a lot, I've done a lot on this show about even telepathy. We all have that ability, and intuition is a
Mhm.
birthright because this is not conscious
Mhm.
for most of us. How much, and maybe going to your own experience, what
Mhm.
showed up for you that came through intuition unconsciously? Would love to hear maybe even the development and the connection to your own higher self,
Mhm.
inner guidance through this kind of work.
Yeah. I like literally am just having like one story after another story just pop up in my mind. So I'll share a few of them. One is when I was doing my yoga teacher training, I was 22. I was very restless in my body, and I liked the movement parts of yoga. I struggled with the stillness parts of yoga. Like that took a lot longer for me to inhabit and feel comfortable with. And so we were in one of the lectures as part of the teacher training. It was a month-long immersion at Kripalu, and I'm laying on my belly in the lecture hall, and my feet are outstretched behind me, and my feet are unconsciously just going like just kind of kicking the floor. And I'm taking notes in my notebook, very unconsciously wiggling around back there. Well, someone was sitting behind me in the lecture hall, and those moving feet must have been driving her nuts. But she very kindly, very lovingly just placed her hands on my feet. At least my perception was that even if it was irritating, she did that out of love. And I immediately burst into tears. It was such a moment of kind of being mirrored in something that I didn't even know was happening. And someone helped hold and meet me there. And I could feel the part of me that was just running. And I had to be with her, right? Oof, right? And I think intuitively at that moment, I could feel the power of that. Like, I don't think I fully integrated what that meant for me for some time, but it was profound. Let's just, kind of fast forward to another moment of where intuition really showed up. And this is quite a ways forward, but I was 29. I was pregnant with my daughter at the time. And as I'm pregnant with my daughter, I am feeling so much come through the gates of that pregnancy. I had one of those very challenging pregnancies where I threw up for 8 months. I mean, I struggled keeping on weight. I lost 20 pounds in the first trimester. It was, what they called hyperemesis, but it was very, very, very difficult. But I could feel intuitively that this soul coming in, my daughter, was helping to unwind something in the maternal lineage. And parts of that story that I kind of loosely knew, but really got to do a deeper dive with, was that my mother wasn't wanted by her mother. Her mother tried to end the pregnancy, and that had this really significant impact on my mother's physiology. And that some part of me knew the felt sense of there is something about this transition and this change in my body that feels really, really scary. And at the same time, my mother had done a lot of work to heal her own wounds. And I could feel that there was something that came through the gates of that, we stop transgenerational trauma when we can, but still things go through to the next generation. I could feel the part of it that had made its way into my body. And now it was my job to heal that. And all of this nausea and all of this vomiting that was happening was actually getting something out, like releasing a pattern so that something new could come through. Okay? I'm going to fast forward one more story here. This was relatively recently. This was, I don't know, 5 years ago when Russia first invaded Ukraine. And so 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. And at that point, I had seen on the news this convoy of tanks going into Kiev. And I knew that was where my family had come from. My mother's grandmother, who, get this. Oh, I didn't know this at the moment, so let me tell this in order. So I'd seen this image. And at this point, I have a meditation practice in my life, thank goodness, because that has changed my life. And I sit down in meditation, and in meditation, that image of the convoy of tanks heading right for Kiev comes through. Deep emotional waves of grief come through, and the words motherland and go look at your family tree. So I come out of meditation, I look at my family tree. I see now that my great-grandmother was pregnant with my grandmother at the time that she had to flee Kiev in that pregnancy because the Jewish people were being placed in pogroms. And there was some part of me that knew that was part of this story and that was ready to be known and to be grieved.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. These are so profound. And you know what? I hope everyone's getting this. It's not linear. This is where our intuition, the deeper knowing, the unconscious, I think of the body keeps the score, right? The cellular memory. And also want to highlight the importance of having some sort of practice where we can go in. For me, meditation as well. And listening to you to be able to get that information and to be able to connect the dots, it adds to your healing. It adds to the whole understanding. And I would imagine compassion, way more compassion.
Yeah. And just even in the telling of it now, because I really never linked those three stories together. And in the telling of it now, I just looped back to my 22-year-old with those little feet going, going, going. And the part of me in chronic flight, I remember one time I was listening to a lecture on generational trauma, and the speaker said that when we have ancestors that had to flee, we carry those flight patterns inside of us. Right?
Mm,
Yeah.
that's powerful.
Right.
Yeah. And I would imagine many, many listening right now have some ancestor from some other place that many of us have experienced that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, can you say a little more? Something is telling me to go more into these traumas that may not be one generation back. I think it'd be helpful,
Yeah.
and there's a part of me, I'm curious, Arielle, too, how far back do we need to heal, right? So if we've, ancestors go back, how many hundreds of generations? Like, we're not talking about, hundreds back. We're talking 5 back, 4, like what, otherwise this could be, I feel like, do I just heal every day? That's what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm making sense with the question, but kind of where do, where do we focus on? Where do we focus the healing on?
I think it speaks to why, like, in a sense, healing feels like a lifelong journey, because
Yeah.
it is, and that's important to recognize that, like, but at this point on the planet, most of us are endowed with generations worth of unfinished business. But that isn't necessarily all a bad thing. Like, one of the things that we forget is that not only is there generational trauma, but there's also generational resilience that we're endowed with. And so even though I might carry the wound of a flight pattern, the womb doesn't feel safe, the wound of the world doesn't feel safe, there's also some part of that ancestral story that we can key into the survivor element of it, the parts that, the people that didn't give up, the people that sought out resource. Like, I remember one time I was doing a piece of work on this for myself, and the question became not what was I running away from, but what was I running toward? And what am I running toward is connection, is joy, is safety, is easefulness, is compassion, is love, is kindness. And those have become my core values. That's what I'm here to pass on and to generate more of in this world. And I don't know that I would be as motivated toward that if there wasn't that adversity at my back. But I want to say one more thing to your question, which is like, where do I start? Or like what should I focus on right now? This is where intuition comes in. Your psyche will guide you. Right? Like, listen to your dreams, listen to what feels like the repeating pattern in your life. That's going to guide you to where something might be stuck. Listen to your body, right? It's going to guide you to where you need to go, and you don't have to control that healing journey.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. I have to say, it is so settling. If we tune in to the frequency of not just what you said, the energy behind what you said, that feels true. And it's also, I'm laughing because even the way I asked that question was really a left brain egoic fear, like, how far do we have to go back? And as soon as you said, I'm like, of course, our intuition, just like, and this goes to why I know we focus so much here on intuition and learning how to listen and get still, because that is where we get our guidance, our answers. And like you meditated and it told you, go look at it's the motherland and your great grandmother. I mean, it just, that to me is just it doesn't get old. I don't know, the power of our inner guidance. In terms of, I love what you started to get into with resilience and what are we moving towards. I know you do a lot around post-traumatic growth.
Mhm.
Love that. Can we talk about the work that you've been doing in that realm and kind of flipping the script a little? Not that we're bypassing the challenges and what we're feeling. We embody that. What are you learning, noticing, seeing? What are you taking away from the work you've been doing for many, 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 many years that would really help someone listening now about growth and resilience and all of those lovely aspects that we can aspire to have
Mm.
and to be.
I think there's so much to say about this. I'll kind of offer up a few pieces that stand kind of like front of mind on this. One is that in studying resilience, like what helps us navigate adversity, it's like you said, we're not bypassing, we're not jumping over. Actually, what helps us navigate is building the resources that we need to attend to the wound, to the pain, to the suffering without over identifying with it. And that's a really key balance. Like, how do I turn toward it without becoming it or reliving it? And when we look through the lens of post-traumatic growth, I think, let me just shift it for a second. When we look through the lens of post-traumatic stress, right? What we're trained to look for are the symptoms and the signs of that lingering impact of trauma. And we do want to pay attention to that. We want to know when we're stuck in patterns of re-experiencing, when we're stuck in patterns of avoidance, when we're experiencing dissociation, when we are kind of reliving and reactivating those trauma experiences. That's all deeply important. But what we also need to look at, and this is where we can broaden that lens towards resilience and post-traumatic growth, is what are your strengths? Who helped you survive? What were those key moments in your life that set you on your path? Like the same questions you're asking me are actually really key questions in the trauma recovery journey, right? That help us look at this bigger picture so that we don't get kind of mired in or, kind of caught in the weeds of the trauma related material. And then we learn to do something very important in the resilience process, which is that we learn to hold this oscillating narrative about ourselves or about our family histories, our ancestors, and so forth. This oscillating narrative that says, these hard things happened. This is how I coped with it. This is who helped me cope with it. This is something I learned about myself along the way. And this is how I use that wisdom or strength that I've accessed about myself to create a meaningful life. And then we turn back towards another hard thing. And then we continue that journey. So I think of it as kind of becoming this weaver that weaves in our struggles and our strengths so that we create this really beautiful, robustly strong fabric.
That's so powerful. Actually, the image I got, Arielle, as you were speaking, and I I know we talk often about, okay, reframing the story. And what I love that you're saying is there's actually, first of all, not to over identify. So there's a way of looking at it, understanding it. And then I think this is the piece that's missing a lot is how did I grow? How did I build resilience? Like what strengths came out of it? And how can I harvest that going forward? Even the idea, of the tapestry where you have these threads in the back of it looks absolutely crazy. I used to have one growing up. My grandmother did needlepoint. I remember I was like, that's terrible. And my mom flipped it. I'm like, that is so pretty. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like those threads that look knotted and then you use it again. And it's like, oh, actually that works. And it shifts the narrative. The thing that lit up is the not over identifying as you were speaking about it. Because I think what can happen is, I'll speak for myself, right, is to have this, it's like, I'm not that trauma. It might have happened. I was raised by a father with PTSD from being a Vietnam veteran, and it showed very sideways, not to me directly, but I picked up on all of his suicidal thoughts and the way he was with my mom. And it was, it- you know, anyhow, there's aspects of that where I've looked at it and could see where I could over identify with some of what he experienced and what I've pulled from it. I love the reminder. It's like we don't need to be attached to it. We can see it, we can understand it, we can work on the somatics. And then there's the piece that is missing, which is what are the strengths? How did that help you grow? Did that get what you were saying? I just felt that was really strong and important to say.
Yeah. So often when I think about it, I like to say that adversity is part of the story and it doesn't have to define the whole story.
Yeah.
And adversity is part of the story and it doesn't have to define the rest of the story. So we are narrators of our lives. And I think, like, again, being the weaver, being the narrator, being the creator, like, it puts us in the seat of life isn't just happening to me, but I'm actually an active creator of the life that I am cultivating. And I think when we're over identified with the trauma, it you know trauma happens to us and it strips us of a sense of choice. It strips us of a sense of control, and that is one of its biggest costs on us. And so, as we heal from trauma and reclaim a sense of hope, going back to that word, a sense of possibility, that in itself can take time. We have to compassionately hold the parts of us that got stripped of that sense of, I'm in the driver's seat of my life. Like, I literally would have these dreams, and I bet you can relate to this, but I would have these dreams of trying to drive a car from the back seat. Like, you can't do it. Or trying to drive an airplane from the back, these impossible scenarios. But that's what trauma does to me. We feel like we're getting pulled along by our anxiety, by our panic, by our hopelessness, by our despair, by our shame, and we don't know how to get in front of it. And so all of these practices, and it's a mind body approach to trauma recovery. It's bottom up through the soma, it's top down through narrative work and catching hold of those core beliefs and being able to shift that. And we need both to get us into that driver's seat.
Beautiful. What do you think is the bigger spiritual lesson, message? What do you think's happening at a spiritual level?
Yeah. This was a story that was very recent, and it came to mind earlier when you said you wanted to loop back to the ancestor work. So I just returned from Australia. I had this amazing opportunity to present at a conference there that was and I got to present on intergenerational trauma and post-traumatic growth. I got to talk about these topics there. I also got to be a recipient at the conference of the wisdom of other speakers. And what was beautiful there is that they centralized many of the indigenous Aboriginal leaders in the field of trauma recovery and centralized their voices. One of the speakers there was an 82-year-old Aboriginal leader, as well as a psychologist who really spoke about trauma recovery from this kind of wisdom center ground. And she shared this story of basically doing her research and going from small community to small community of Indigenous peoples and hearing their truth tellings of the stolen generation, the wounds that happened when children were taken from their families, placed in these residential schools, and very similar to what happened in Canada, similar to what's happened in the US, right? Like tragedies of bearing witness to people who saw their family members be beat and so on and so forth. It's just horrible, and so much sexual assault and et cetera, et cetera. And she described how, as she was bearing witness to these stories, how it was accumulating in her own soma as so much pain. And that she, at some point, was actually brought aside by the Indigenous women leaders to do ceremony over her to help relieve her of her pain. And she said at that moment, a clarity came through her that said, the pain will persist until it has served its purpose. Whoa, right? Like, powerful message. And that message literally just got downloaded into me, and I'm sharing it here because I know it's going to be important for someone out there, or at least probably many of us, right? Like, something about, how does pain ultimately serve its purpose? How does it fuel our compassion? How does it deepen our empathy so that we can show up as more humble and more kindness and more compassion for each other?
I am so glad you got that intuitive download to share that. I think that that is really, it's like it's a mic drop moment, honestly, that I'm still sitting with it. It's so powerful, right? And I go back to the greater spiritual lesson, if we're all here, you talked about it earlier, that adversity, trauma can be part of it. It's like we are living, at least at this point, it's a world of duality where we have these experiences of really big challenges. And you were saying earlier, even with your mom in utero, things were happening that were blessings and also not. And how do we really recognize, I mean, I'm going even wider lens, but how do we recognize our divinity, the essence of who we are amidst that? And to me, that goes back to the not over identifying with the trauma and I love what you said, the encouraging, empowering. We're narrating at all times. What are we narrating from that? So powerful. And that the pain, there's a lesson. I can tell you, and I'm curious, Arielle, for me, when I've had usually physical pain too, but emotional pain, honestly, and sometimes still, it's like my instinct is to run the F away. I mean, that's mine. Like, I know not everyone has that one. I'm like, get me out of here. I don't want to feel that. It's fleeing. Like, please let me flee the scene. I don't want to feel that. And I actually had a moment as you were talking, thinking about, well, no wonder I don't want to feel that. If I felt that when I was little with someone who was, I mean, of course, why would you want to feel that? So learning to feel that, have compassion, hold space, and also there's a lesson, there's a message.
That's right. And I mean, going back to your story, which is such a tender share about your father and what you picked up on in him and his own, thought field and so forth, I am sure, I'm confident that built your intuitive capacities because you had to sense and feel beyond what was being said into trusting your knowing, into sensing what was between the lines. And that is in itself a skill set that can come out of trauma, but that also becomes a spiritual strength.
Yeah. And this is a great example for you, our listeners, wherever you are, to look at that. Thank you for saying that. I've thought about this and it's interesting. My mom and is actually the opposite of that, is not in tune with, I mean, very loving and not in tune at all with the in between. And it was confusing. And also it's a gift because I was always, I mean, I could hear his thoughts. Ooh, makes me want to cry. I mean, I could hear his thoughts when I was little and I didn't know, the word telepathy or empath I mean, I really legit, and I've confirmed it with him later. I could hear all these thoughts when he was outwardly looking so happy and I knew. So it's interesting. That is true. And I think all of us, like, let's look at the pain, the trauma, and then what are the gifts? Like, that is one of my biggest gifts is feeling and sensing and thoughts that are, I can tell, I just know. I don't know. I don't want to say I always know, but I intuitively I'm in tune because started early and we can all do this. I think this is where we see the gifts in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can take time to integrate the gifts and also sometimes to kind of like tease out the gift from the wound, right? Because sometimes they're so intersected that the gift always comes through the revisiting or the replaying out of the wound itself. And so, you get to actually extract and keep with that which you want to keep. You get to hold on to that. And it's okay. Just like, I mean, I locate our intuition right here. I locate it in the gut belly wisdom, which, as we heal our gut, we also are literally just healing that capacity to trust what our gut knows. And our gut is a great metaphor because, in the digestive process, the gut has to discern that's nourishment, that's waste, that's not necessary for me, and that's toxic. And we have different responses. We assimilate that which we want to keep, right? The gift. We can let go of that which is extraneous. And we sometimes need to eject that which could harm us.
I love that. I've not heard it said that way. I think it's such great food for thought. It's a good
Good.
metaphor. Yeah. I would love to ask, is there anything we haven't discussed or that's there for you intuitively or you'd like to share, especially as it relates to creating this empowering context for all of us in a world that feels like sometimes it's
Yeah.
the duality, right? We've got a lot of beautiful shifting happening and also a lot of challenge. And I am curious if there's anything, I like asking this coming through you or that I didn't ask that feels like it's on your heart that you'd like to share with our beautiful community.
Yeah, I'll share one last story. So I earlier this year, it's been a big year of travel. I got to travel across the international date line a few times this year, and I went to Bhutan earlier this year, which was an amazing gift, and went to go study with a teacher there who then later actually came to the U.S. and I got to sit with her again, and she was teaching on the wisdom of Avalokiteshvara, and if that's a new name for anyone here, Avalokiteshvara is basically the essence of compassion. It's the Buddha of compassion, and the in one of these lines of this very complex Bhutanese teachings on compassion, there was this one phrase, and this is one of those phrases that just kind of jumped off the page and landed in my heart. And it said that the chances of being incarnated into a human body are as small as a blind turtle swimming through the sea who gets its head caught in a knot of driftwood. All right. So if indeed it's a rare and blessed experience to have this opportunity to be human with all of its tragedy, with all of the suffering, with all of the uncontrollable adversities that we have to face as part of this human experience, might we also hold that we got this opportunity to navigate all of that, all of those complexities, to feel all of the mess of it. And not everybody gets that. Not every, like there is something unique and precious while we are embodied on this earth that we get to do with this precious time.
Amen to that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm still picturing the turtle. Like, how is that? That is a very powerful way to say it. We are miracles,
Yeah.
and everyone. This is I'll just say this. It won't sound weird here. Sometimes when in this kind of conversation that feels to me, very tangibly connected to the one energy of love, of light. I mean, I can feel you. I can feel you listening, watching, wherever you are, all of us. Like we are all part of this beautiful opportunity / light. We all are it. We are it. And thank you so much, Arielle. There is so much in what you've shared, so much to digest, to sit with, to look at. What I'm coming away with, it's like if I had a tagline, it's like we're all champions in our life. We're all champions. We're all the warrior, powerful, powerful creators. And always, how are we looking at it? How are we talking about it? And I love that reminder about the narrative. I love the creator and the chances of being here. It's like, let that maybe just sit for a moment. And that means all of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What a gift. What a gift. And I just want to thank you, our beloved listener, soul brother and sister, wherever you are. Wasn't this fantastic? Such a delicious, beautiful conversation to digest and to sit with. And I hope, as always, that this helps you to get closer to the beautiful, sacred being that you are, your infinite, eternal self, your you-est you. And thank you, Arielle, again, for your presence and your heart and your wisdom. What an honor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, it's Julie. I just wanted to pop in really quickly. I'm so honored to be here on your path of being your truest You-est You. And what I really have seen in the 15 years that I have guided and worked with and coached and led heart-centered leaders and conscious coaches and healers, soul seekers, light workers, change makers like you, is that it's not just about seeking change. It's about being called. It's about stepping into your higher self, your future self that you know you came here to live and to lead. So maybe you're feeling a little stuck or unclear, or you would love support to help you tune in and really access your heart-centered dreams and desires to be fully self-expressed, to be uplifting humanity, to be adding more light on this planet, to be expressing your gifts and your You-est You. There are two really easy paths to do that with me. First, I have a manifestation breakthrough session that is all about rapid clarity, activation, and certainly intuition, or the deep dive. This is my intuitive mentorship journey. It is a 5-month transformative experience. This includes intuitive coaching, sacred container with accountability, and really helping you to tap into your greatest desires and dreams to help you access and really actualize your highest potential to be your You-est You. So if you're interested in either ways to work together, go to julieriesler.com/mentorship. And that is where you can learn all about those options. And if you are leaning in, if it's feeling like a soul yes, I invite you to trust that and remember that what you are seeking is always seeking you. Much love.